The winter of 1875 in Montana was the type that could freeze hope itself. On a deteriorating homestead, Sarah Collins and her two young children were just hanging on to existence. Then, one stormy night, fate literally came knocking on their door, bringing a dying stranger into their lives. It was not your typical drifter. A dashing cowboy, his expensive coat blood-stained, wounds obviously from bullets. Despite having so little food remaining for her own family, Sarah's conscience would not permit her to send him away. She pulled the stranger in, tended his wounds with the last of her precious medicine, and shared their last bowl of stew. What she had no way of knowing at the time was that this one gesture of kindness would not only redirect his life, but change the fate of her family as well. But before we get the secret this injured cowboy had, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a follow-up tale you won't want to miss. That morning, Sarah knelt before the family Bible, her fingertips tracing across familiar names and dates, births and marriages, and now, the ink still wet on her husband William's death certificate. Pneumonia had taken him just 4 months before, leaving behind a farm too large to manage and 2 children far too young to shoulder such a burden. Through the cabin's solitary window, she saw 10-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Thomas playing in the yard, their laughter tinged with bitterness in light of adversity. Emma was already assisting with chores that should have waited until womanhood, and Thomas, doing his best to be the man of the house, was acquiring lessons no boy his age should have to endure. The homestead was sliding through her hands. Just 3 milk cows were left of their one-time thriving herd. The barn roof hung precariously low, and the wheat fields were half-planted. She'd already sold William's tools, his horse, and even her mother's silver tea set, but the funds hardly made a dent in their requirements. And now the bank was sniffing around, yesterday's visit from Mr. Jenkins still resonating in her mind. 3 months, Mrs. Collins. That's all the time we can spare. Breakfast that morning was a meager bowl of porridge, stretched thin with dried apple rings. Emma entered, her face too grave for so young an age. "Only 3 eggs today, Mama," she said softly. Sarah smiled anyway. 3 eggs were still a blessing. Thomas came in aggressively with a bundle of dry wood, his sleeves already too short for his expanding arms. Sarah tousled his hair and complimented him, even as she secretly fretted over how she would dress them come winter. At dinner, Emma reported that Mrs. Peterson from church had asked her to be paid for repairing garments. The idea of her children working for other people tore at Sarah's heart, but pride wouldn't keep them alive. Education was not optional, though William had insisted they would both learn to read and write, come what may. Sarah sat with them at breakfast, saw them head off to school with their heads held high, all but ignored the tattered clothes and scuffed boots. It wasn't until the cabin fell silent that she allowed herself to weep. "Oh, William," she breathed into the silence, "how am I to manage this without you? 3 months to save their house, 3 months to work a miracle." By evening, the sky was dark with an oncoming storm. The wind screamed down the valley, banging the shutters as Sarah completed putting up the day's slim harvest, 3 turnips and a few winter squash. Then she heard him, Thomas's voice carried on the wind, sharp and insistent. "Mama, Mama, come quick." Heart racing, she raced towards the wheat field edge. Emma was rooted, looking at a smudge of black in the mud. Sarah's heart stopped. A man was crumpled on the ground, blood staining his fancy shirt. At his side, a beautiful black stallion was dead, its fancy Mexican silver spurs sparkling in the dying light. All of the stranger's air was of money, his coat, his boots, but none of that counted while his life seeped into the Montana earth. "He's still alive, Mama," Emma whispered, her own voice shaking. Sarah's head spun. They had nearly nothing left, no extra food next to no medicine, but she could not let him die. "Thomas, start the fire. Emma, assist me with him." On her knees in the muck, Sarah pressed her fingers to his throat. The pulse was weak, beating like a bird trying to get free. The man moaned as they rolled him over, and Sarah knew everything would be different forever. He was a large man, hard muscle under those nice clothes. Blood stuck to his black hair, and more welled steadily from a deep gash in his side. His face was lined with pain, but his features were the kind that hinted at one accustomed to issuing commands and being obeyed. "What do you suppose happened to him?" Emma asked, her little body tensing to assist Sarah in pulling the unconscious man toward the cabin. "Nothing good," Sarah replied firmly, noticing the powder residue along with the bullet hole in his shirt. This was no hunting accident. They were able to get him inside, although Sarah's back let out a plaintive cry. Thomas was already having the fire blazing, his eyes flicking anxiously towards the rivulets of blood on the floor. "Emma, get my herb box. Thomas, bring water and clean rags." Sarah's voice was firm, although her hands shook as she started cutting the stranger's shirt. The wound was unsightly, but the bullet had passed through cleanly. She'd seen worse during the war when their farm had been an unofficial field hospital. She washed and bound the wound, saw other scars, old bullet holes, cuts, a lifetime of combat carved into his flesh. What sort of man was she inviting into her house, close to her children? Her gaze fell on something else. A silver pocket watch, delicate and blood-soaked, dangling from his vest. She opened it up to read an inscription, to J.W. with eternal love, Margaret. Whoever he was, this man had been deeply beloved. That was enough to make her not turn him out. All through the night, she and the children worked. Emma changed cold packs and made poultices out of the remaining herbs of Sarah's, while Thomas tended the fire and kept watch on the window. For what? Sarah didn't care to wonder. The fever came with the moon, and the stranger tossed in delirium, mumbling, "Margaret, forgive me, should have been there. The papers in the saddle must hush now." His voice, even fever-rough, carried a refined tone. "You're safe here," Sarah whispered, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. By morning, the fever had broken. Sarah put the children to bed, their tired eyes and worried faces etched with sleeplessness and concern. She remained at the stranger's side, examining the sharp contours of his face and speculating about who he might be and what had pushed him, hurt and alone, to the brink of their dying farm. When the first light of dawn crept into the room, his eyes opened, piercing blue, keen and intelligent even with weakness still in him. He gazed at her for a long time, confusion changing to comprehension. "You saved my life," he whispered, his voice gruff but kind. Sarah nodded, feeling guilty for the messy hair and poverty evident on each corner of the cabin. "Rest now. Questions can wait." As she stood up, he grasped her hand with unlooked-for force. "Thank you," he breathed, earnestness buried deep in his voice before shutting his eyes again, this time in quiet slumber. Sarah watched him for a moment longer, something moving within her heart. In some inexplicable way, she felt that life would never be the same again after that evening. The following 2 days were a blur of agitated grumblings and watchful tending. Sarah dispatched the children to school, although she was aware that their minds remained behind with the enigmatic stranger in their cabin. Even school, Emma told her later, was filled with gossip. Thomas had discovered a crumpled wanted poster near the schoolhouse, depicting rough men who were wanted for terrorizing the local ranches. Likely the same bunch who killed him, Thomas had breathed at dinner, eyes wide. Or perhaps, Emma said slowly, stirring her meager soup, he's fleeing from them. Sarah silenced them both, though the same considerations continued to go round and round in her head. His well-dressed appearance suggested money, but his scars spoke of brutality. His delirious chatter was odder still. "The double H must be safeguarded," he'd whisper, or cry out for Margaret in a voice choked with sorrow. Sometimes he'd stiffen sharply, fists balling, talking of ambushes and treachery. But in his lucid moments, he was nothing but gracious, thanking Sarah for the slightest courtesy and once declining their valuable broth. "Ma'am, I can't take food from your children's mouths." "Nonsense," Sarah had responded, her heart softened in spite of herself. "A body needs strength to heal." On the third morning, while changing his bandages, Sarah noticed the fever was completely gone. His blue eyes followed her movements, clear and steady. "Your children," he said suddenly, his voice stronger, "they're well-behaved. You've done a fine job with them." Sarah paused. "Thank you. They're good kids, though they've had to grow up too fast." He nodded, his gaze taking in the humble room. "Times are hard." "We get by," she replied brusquely, pride compelling her to add, "We don't want charity, mister." He smiled slightly. "Harrison, James Harrison." He paused, as if considering his words. "And I should never assume to give charity, Mrs. Collins, but I do believe in settling my debts." Something in his voice caught Sarah looking up. His eyes did not blink, and she had the unnerving sense that in those brief seconds he had watched it all. The frayed spots on their clothes, the cracks on the walls, and each private indication of just how dire their situation had grown. Before Sarah could answer, the door swung open and Emma staggered in, out of breath. "Mama, riders are approaching," she panted. Her voice was tainted with fear and Sarah's heart tightened. James Harrison's response was immediate. The pale, recuperating invalid was no more. What replaced him was a man of acuteness and quiet command. "Get the kids behind the root cellar door," he commanded, already thrusting himself up despite the agony. "If anyone asks, you haven't seen a body." Questions seared on the tip of Sarah's tongue. Who were these men? Why was he so sure they were trouble? But there was no time. The clatter of horse hooves was getting closer. She rushed Emma and Thomas into the root cellar, putting a finger to her lips. Then she smoothed her apron, calmed her breathing, and went out just as 3 horsemen pulled up to the cabin. They were hard men, clothes dusted from the trail, eyes sharp, pistols riding easy at their hips. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, tipped his hat with mock politeness. "Afternoon, ma'am. We're looking for a friend of ours, tall fellow, well-dressed. Might have passed through here recently." Sarah met his gaze without flinching, summoning every ounce of the steel she'd once admired in William. "Haven't seen anyone fitting that description. We don't get many visitors out here." The man's eyes narrowed, searching her face for a crack in her story. Behind him, his companions scanned the property like wolves scenting prey. "Mind if we look around, just to be thorough?" "I do mind," Sarah replied calmly. "My children are in the house, and I don't permit strange men around them. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to work." Her heart was racing, but she did not back down. Finally, the leader's lip twisted into a fake smile, and he jerked the reins around to take his horse away. She waited until the riders were dots on the horizon before shutting the door behind them. She leaned against it, shaking. What kind of man was she keeping out, and what kind of danger had she let into her home? That night, after the children were in bed, Sarah confronted James with a mug of willow bark tea and the questions she could no longer suppress. He sat against the bedding on the floor, looking healthier though his face was still pale. "Those men," she started softly, "they weren't your friends." "No, ma'am," James replied, taking the tea with a bow. "And thank you for not mentioning their friend to them. I know it wasn't easy to lie like that." Sarah settled into William's armchair, her fingers tracing the familiar armrests. "It wasn't really a lie. I haven't laid eyes on their friend, just a hurt man who needed aid." A ghost of a smile flitted across his lips. "You have a diplomatic way with words, Mrs. Collins." He stretched beside him, pulling out a folded paper from his coat. "I think it's time you knew who you're hiding." She spread the paper and stopped. It was a deed. Not any deed, but to the Double H Ranch, one of the largest in the territory. The name read, James William Harrison. "You own the Double H," she gasped. "I do," he replied, putting aside his tea, his tone growing serious. "Those men who visited today, they're working for Marcus Blackwood, but unofficially. He's been attempting to purchase the Double H from me for years, using any means at his disposal. This," he indicated his healing wound, "was his latest means of persuasion." Sarah's mind reeled. The nice clothes, the beautiful horse, his authoritative attitude, it all fell into place now. But there was something still that confused her. "Why tell me this?" "Because you and your kids risked everything to save a stranger. You have a right to know the truth and to know about the danger you've undertaken. More importantly, you have a right to know I can shield you from any fallout of that decision." Sarah's spine stiffened. "We didn't assist you in hopes of getting paid, Mr. Harrison." "James," he said softly, "and I understand that you didn't. That's why I'd like to assist you." Thomas suddenly materialized in the doorway, rumpled with sleep and clinging to his father's old wooden horse. "Mama," I heard voices. Before Sarah could lead him back to bed, James said, "Come here, young man." Thomas paused, then moved forward. James had his hand in his coat and produced a tiny horse carved out of wood, every muscle and flowing mane executed in fine detail. "Working on this during my downtime," James explained, handing it to him. "Kept me from losing my mind. What do you think?" Thomas's face glowed with excitement. "It resembles your horse, sir, the one which—" He cleared his throat, recalling the dead stallion. "Yes," James whispered. "His name was Midnight. He was a good friend." James demonstrated to Thomas how the wooden legs could be arranged. "Every good horse deserves a good owner. Think you can care for him?" Thomas nodded gravely, holding the carving to his chest. "Thank you, James. I'll take real good care of it." Sarah's throat constricted. William had spent countless nights carving toys for the children, just like this. After she had settled Thomas back into bed, she went back to discover James standing by the door with an introspective look. "He's a good boy," he remarked. "Reminds me of myself at his age before." He broke off, pain dancing in his face. "Before what?" Sarah inquired. "Before I understood the world isn't kind to dreamers," he answered softly. "Your children still have that light in their eyes, Mrs. Collins. They haven't lost hope no matter what. That's a testament to your strength." "Sarah," she corrected softly, "then you have to call me James." He grinned, and for an instant she glimpsed beyond the prosperous rancher to the man underneath. The man who knew loss, adversity, and the precious worth of plain kindness. "I believe tomorrow I'll be able to teach Thomas how to whittle, if you don't mind." "I believe he would like that immensely." Sarah smiled in spite of herself. Neither spoke of the deed still between them, nor the riders who may come back. For the moment, it was sufficient to enjoy the stillness of a tentative trust already taking root. During the course of the next few days, as James improved in strength, Sarah found him eyeing her family with a look she could not define. Mornings were taken up in teaching Thomas to whittle, afternoons in listening to Emma read. And although unstated, the atmosphere in the cabin was undeniable. Something was on the horizon. Days went by in a regular beat, mornings spent with the children reading aloud from their textbooks, eating supper in the evenings to the sound of James recounting stories of cattle drives and frontier adventures that captivated them. But in the still, unguarded moments, Sarah learned most about their enigmatic visitor. That afternoon, when the children were at school, Sarah entered the room and saw James standing by the window, holding a frayed photograph she had not seen before. In the faded picture, A lovely young woman smiled towards the camera, her hand lightly on the shoulder of a younger James. "Margaret," he said quietly, not moving from where he stood. Sarah stiffened at the sense of weight in his voice. "That one from the pocket watch inscription?" she inquired softly. He nodded, finally looking at her. "She passed away 8 years ago. Fever took her and our unborn child." His fingers ran along the edges of the photograph as if touching would revive her. "I constructed the double H for her, you see. She had a vision of a home where we'd grow up a family and grow old together. By the time it was completed, she was dead." The admission lingered as dust motes in sunlight. Now Sarah knew why the rich owner of the double H lived by himself, why his eyes occasionally held shadows. "My husband William constructed this cabin himself," Sarah whispered, sharing her own shard of sorrow. "Said each nail was a vow for our future together." James sat down in a chair, his recuperating wound permitting him greater freedom. "How did you and he meet?" "At a barn raising. He was the only one who didn't act as if I were some delicate flower, likely because I was the preacher's daughter." She smiled at the recollection. "First thing he said was, 'Those hands look like they know honest work.' Wise man." Sarah's fingers smoothed over her mending, the rhythmic motion soothing. "Emma has his stubbornness, Thomas has his soft heart. They're great kids," James said, observing her. "The way they've risen to the challenge without protest. Strength is not just physical. Sometimes I fear it's too much for them," she confessed. "They should be laughing, not—" She waved her hand at their frayed surroundings. "They do play," James said softly. "I've seen them, but they also understand family, loyalty, hard work, lessons some grown men never learn." Their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding, two people shaped by loss, connected by the resilience it forged. The moment ended when the children's voices rang from outside. Emma burst in, clutching a paper. "James, the teacher said my arithmetic was perfect today." James's face brightened like sun breaking through clouds. "Well, that deserves a celebration. Why don't I show you how to do cattle percentages? Every rancher should know their figures." That night Sarah observed him with the children. No patronage, no insincere praise, only sincere interest and kind tutelage. Later, when the children were sleeping, Sarah discovered him on the porch, staring at the stars. His wound had healed almost completely, and soon he would depart. The realization filled her with a pain she hadn't anticipated. "I've been alone at the double H for so long," he said, voice low. "I'd forgotten what it's like to have a family around." He turned toward her, his expression open in the moonlight. "Thank you for reminding me." She longed to speak to him of how his being had restored something essential to their home, but the words hung in her throat. She merely nodded instead, the still night air filled with unspoken understanding between them. In the far distance, a lonely coyote's howl echoed, one wild sound and one voice achingly familiar. The morning after, James stood in the kitchen looking the full rancher again. "Before I go," he said, setting a fat envelope on the table, "there's something we need to talk about." Sarah's spine went rigid. "We've done all right so far, Mr. Harrison." "James," he reminded her with a gentle smile. "Yes, you have, but at what expense?" He indicated for her to sit. "Just listen to me, please." The children lingered in the doorway, curiosity in their eyes. James smiled warmly. "Children, give your mother and me a moment." They slipped away, though Sarah suspected their ears would stay close. "This," James said, pushing the envelope toward her, "is a bank notice. I've settled your mortgage." Sarah's hand flew to her throat. "You had no right." "Maybe not," he replied, holding up a hand. "But I did have the resources. The bank will never again hold your house hostage." Relief struggled with pride in Sarah's breast. "We can't accept." "You can," James stated firmly. "And you will, not as charity, but as an investment in human beings who were exceptionally kind to a stranger." He pulled another paper from his coat. "The double H requires honest, able individuals. I'm inviting you in on a partnership of sorts." Sarah shook as she read. A contract to run a new breeding operation he was going to begin on her property. "Your property sits on excellent grazing land," he explained. "With improvements, a barn, fencing, quality stock, it could thrive again. The children can stay in school and learn ranching if they choose. You'd receive a fair wage and a share of the profits." Sarah looked up, overwhelmed. "Why?" "In the week I've been here," he said, his gaze steady, "I've seen more strength and dignity than I've found in years of business." James's voice had softened as he regarded Sarah. "Your kids are smart and diligent. You're strong and determined. The double H would be more powerful with folks like you on board." He fished in his vest pocket for a small key. "There's a strong box in my saddlebag. Would you have Thomas bring it?" When Thomas came back with the box, James opened it carefully. There were piles of banknotes and more papers. "This," James said, "is an advance on your wages, enough to make the immediate repairs the property requires." He gestured to the documents. "These are letters of recommendation from my friends in town. The general store, the mercantile, the lumberyard. They'll give you credit on my word for whatever materials you require. Sarah experienced a surge of pride and pragmatism within herself. The offer was generous, more than generous. It had the potential to change everything. But taking help on this scale, I won't be beholden to any man, she stated firmly. James smiled. I wouldn't think so. This is business, Sarah, pure and simple. You'll earn everything you get. He waved toward the contract. Read it. Have an attorney review it if you wish. I'll abide by whatever you decide. At that moment, Emma's voice was heard from the doorway, not able to keep her enthusiasm hidden. Does this mean we can repair the barn? James smiled warmly, turning. If your mother says so, yes, and perhaps some additional horses to teach you and Thomas on. Thomas emerged at his sister's side, eyes wide with hope. Actual horses, our own horses. Sarah shot a wary glance, but James held up a hand, gentle. Let them dream just a little bit. His gaze held hers. Dreams sometimes grant us the strength to accept assistance when pride dictates otherwise. She looked at the eager faces of her children, then back at the documents in front of her. She remembered William and his vision for their family, and how he was always talking about opportunity, often having bizarre guises. I will need time to consider, she said finally. James nodded, standing. Of course, I'll return in 3 days. He paused at the door. Remember, Sarah, accepting help doesn't mean giving up your independence. Sometimes it means choosing a different path to the same goal. When he went out, Sarah sat for hours. The contract unfolded before her, hearing her children's bright whispers and sensing the heaviness of potential radiating against her breast like a breathing creature. There were blueprints for the renovation of their homestead on her kitchen table. New lines drawing out a future she wasn't yet certain she believed in. 3 weeks since she had signed James's contract, and already the land was changing. New barn shoots up in no time, its pungent, newly cut wood filling the spring air. Local men, hearing that James Harrison of the Double H was supporting the project, seemed willing to donate their labor. Sarah stood in her doorway, recalling memories of barn raisings gone by, when William was still alive and their future still assured. It's good bones, James replied, standing beside her. He'd been going out there regularly to monitor the work, though Sarah suspected the other motives behind his regular appearances, as if the entire property just needed someone to look at its potential. The town hummed with rumor once the news got out about their agreement. Sarah overheard hints at church and noticed the prying looks. Some, such as Mrs. Peterson, came with sincere friendliness, happy to notice the Collins family's luck changing. Others, such as the banker's wife, observed with thinly veiled disdain, presuming something unsuitable between the widow and the wealthy rancher. Let them talk, James replied when she told him. Those who have never known adversity are quick to judge those who do. There was something in his voice that made it sound like he'd known this sort of judgment firsthand. Emma and Thomas appeared blissfully oblivious to gossip, far too caught up in every new twist. The arrival of the first 2 horses, gentle, well-trained animals James had picked especially for them, brought tears to their eyes. Now they spent every free moment at the corral, learning to ride under James's patient instruction. Back straight, Thomas, James called out, watching the boy guide his mount in careful circles. That's it, you're a natural, son. The slip of the word had come so easily that Sarah observed Thomas straighten slightly in his saddle. James hadn't caught it, but Sarah sensed its weight profoundly. He had started to fill gaps in their existence they hadn't known were there. The new wing's foundation will begin tomorrow, James stated, reading over the plans once more. The children will each get a room of their own. Sarah followed the blue lines with her hand. It looks like so much. Not in relation to what you've provided, James said softly, seriously. When she looked at him inquiringly, he went on. A reminder of what's important, why I constructed the Double H in the first place. It was never going to be about profit. A shout of excitement from the corral broke in on them. Emma had successfully completed her first good trot, her face aglow with pride. Mama, did you see? Well done, darling, Sarah shouted back, her heart overflowing. She hadn't heard so much happiness in Emma's voice since William died. James grinned at Emma's improvement, then turned to Sarah again. There's one other thing I want to talk to you about, he said. The school board met yesterday. Sarah tensed, recalling all the times she'd begged for help to buy her children's books. I've arranged for a proper library to be built, James continued, and for a second teacher to be hired. The children in this district deserve every chance to learn. The whole district? Sarah asked, surprised. Not just Emma and Thomas, James shook his head. Education lifts everyone, Sarah. He looked at her reflectively. Your children remind me of that, seeing them with their books each evening. She examined his profile, this man who had come into their lives like a figure from one of Emma's books. Why are you actually doing all this, James? He stood in silence a long while, observing Thomas and Emma with their horses. "When Margaret passed away, I forgot something essential," he finally said. "I forgot that riches without purpose are simply weight in your pockets. Your family taught me what it is to make something of substance." A yell from the barn caught their attention. The workers had completed raising the main beam. There would be a tack room, a storage area for hay, and a stable for the horses. The building plans detailed every aspect as if well thought out. "Progress," James said quietly, satisfaction in his tone. But Sarah heard something more beneath. This was not just about structures. Before she had a chance to ask, Emma summoned him to stand and observe her trot once more, and he retreated, allowing Sarah to consider the transformations occurring not just to their land, but to their hearts as well. Emma's initial riding saddle arrived one Tuesday morning, tooled leather glistening with fine patterns of morning glories and wild roses. She stood mute, fingers tracing the intricate work, as James described the craftsmanship into it. "Each good horsewoman deserves her own saddle," he taught her, demonstrating how to tend the leather. "This one's tailored just for you. The pattern," he hesitated, a glint in his eyes. "Morning glories were Margaret's favorite. It seemed appropriate somehow." Sarah, standing in the doorway of the barn, knew how important it was. James wasn't merely presenting Emma with a saddle. He was offering a fragment of his history, splicing the fibers of abandoned hopes into their future. "It's lovely," Emma breathed, and shocked them all by throwing her arms around James's waist. He stood there stock-still for a second before encircling her in his arms, his countenance a blend of happiness and long-standing sorrow. "Well now," he growled, clearing his throat, "let's get you on that mare of yours." The lessons that ensued were not merely about riding. James instructed Emma and Thomas on how to approach a horse correctly, interpret its mood, and gain its trust. Sarah was learning too, observing the patient way he established their confidence. "Horses are like people," he told them one afternoon, as Thomas fought to get his mount to comply. "They sense if you're nervous or uncertain. You have to believe in yourself before they'll believe in you." Thomas scowled, holding the reins too tightly. "But what if I get it wrong?" "Then you learn from it." James tenderly adjusted the boy's hands. "That's all any of us can do. Your father, he would have taught you these things, wouldn't he?" Thomas nodded, eyes shining with unshed tears. "He promised to teach me everything about the farm when I got bigger." "He'd be proud of you now," James said softly. "Learning new things, helping your mother, being brave even when it's hard." He took a step back, motioning to the horse. "Now show me that turn again. Remember confidence." Sarah observed as her son squared his shoulders, determination taking the place of doubt. The horse reacted instantly, making a flawless turn. "That's my boy," James shouted out, pride evident in his voice. He turned and saw Sarah standing there, watching them, and something flashed between them, an unspoken recognition of what these moments were. Later in the evening, as Sarah was cooking supper, she could hear James and Emma outside on the porch, their voices carrying in through the open window. Emma was questioning James about the Double H, about cattle production and breeding programs. "I want to know it all," Emma stated. "Mama says girls can do anything if they set their minds to it." "Your mama's a wise woman," James replied. "You know, some of the best ranch managers I know are women. They have a natural way with the animals and attention to detail many men miss." "Could I be a ranch manager someday, with hard work and learning?" "Absolutely." James's voice held no condescension, only genuine encouragement. "Show you something? Tomorrow I'll take you through how we maintain breeding records. Math, genealogy, close observation. It all plays a part in making a strong herd." Sarah stirred the stew, recalling William's words about Emma. "That child's got more fire in her belly than most men twice her age." He would have enjoyed seeing her like that, eyes shining with determination, mind hungry to learn. The screen door groaned as Thomas came out to join his sister and James on the porch. They were soon in earnest discussion of various horse breeds, Thomas's innate curiosity eliciting James's vast expertise. Sarah heard their voices mingling with the twilight, her children's cheerful questions, James's reflective replies, the comfortable laughter they shared. This was what healing felt like. She understood, not the absence of pain, but the presence of new joy growing alongside treasured memories. James caught her attention behind the window, his smile warm enough to make her heart skip a beat. He'd given them something more than financial security. He'd given them back their sense of possibility, their right to dream beyond mere survival. "Mama," Thomas called, "James says I can assist with the new calves when they arrive. Real ranch work." "That's great, darling," she replied, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. "Now get cleaned up for dinner, both of you." As the children clattered into the house, James stayed on the porch, his face contemplative. "They're smart ones," he commented as Sarah walked over to him. "Like their mother." Sarah felt her face grow warm. "We've had a good teacher." His hand found hers in the growing darkness, a brief touch as natural as breathing. "We're all learning together, Sarah. That's what family does." The word family hung between them, full of questions and promises. Summer mellowed into autumn, painting the Montana sky with rich golds and deep blues. James unrolled a hand-drawn map across the kitchen table, showing Sarah how their modest homestead had grown. New fencing extended over extended pastures. The new barn was a proud and solid structure, and the wheat field, William's joy and pride, had produced its first bountiful harvest in years. "The land here is prime," James said, marking the perimeter of their land. "With careful crop rotation and the new irrigation system, and you'll have even better yields next year." Sarah read the map, astounded at how much their world had grown. "I never imagined I'd see this place prosperous again." "You always had a basis for success," James replied warmly. "It just needed some reinforcement to recover." The harvest festival was coming on, and for the first time since William's passing, Sarah was ready to really take part. The Collins had always given before, but this year was different. Their root cellar was bursting, their pantry filled, and Emma had even brought home a ribbon for horsemanship from the county fair. "Mrs. Peterson wanted to know if we'd have the quilting circle over next week," Sarah said, smoothing her apron. "Said our new parlor addition would be just right for it." James smiled, realizing the importance. The quilting bee was not simply sewing. It was the center of the social network of the community where reputations were earned or restored. Their acceptance brought a change to how the town perceived their altered situation. "You should accept," he told her. "Those women will recognize what I've seen all along, a family that endures with dignity." The beat of hooves broke through. Emma and Thomas rode into sight, their horses evenly matched as they re-inspected the fence line. "James has shown them how to ride together," Sarah murmured, watching her children from the window. "They appear born to it." "They were," James said. "It was only lying in their veins, waiting for the right time to stir." He drew closer, his bulk and calm a comforting presence alongside her, like things that lie in wait for the proper time. Sarah's cheeks flushed, sensing his proximity. These were occurring increasingly, unobtrusive chats with more meaning, accidental touches timed just a fraction too long. The local news had moved from rumor to waiting for when, not if, the rich rancher would declare his intentions. But James never hurried or assumed. He constructed this bond as painstakingly as he had reconstructed the farm, placing each brick of trust with slow consideration. The children came bursting in, carrying the sharp autumn air with them. I mean James," Thomas said, blushing. "We discovered 2 breaks in the north fence, but we flagged them just as you taught us." The slip was not unnoticed. James caught Sarah's eye for a moment before he turned to Thomas. "Good work, son. Point out on the map where you discovered them." As Thomas hastened to point out the locations, Emma joined Sarah at the stove. "Mama, Mrs. Davidson at the general store told me they need some assistance with bookkeeping. She remembered how good I do with numbers since James instructed me on the breeding records. Do you think we will bring it up?" Sarah agreed, pleased at her daughter's initiative. That Emma should work in town had once frightened her, but now, with their settled life and James's steady presence, it seemed natural to allow her to fly. Subsequently, when the children were abed, James stood by the door. "The harvest festival," he said. "I thought perhaps if you'd permit me to take you and the children out." Sarah felt a smile pull at her lips. It was sweet to get the self-assured rancher to stutter over words like a bashful suitor. "We'd be honored," she said merely. His responding smile illuminates his entire face. "Then I'll bid you good night, Mrs. Collins." He doffed his hat, a gesture both respectful and familiar. She watched him ride away into the approaching dusk. Sarah ran her hand along the window frame that William had made so many years before. The elm wood was cool to the touch, strong and steadfast, much like the foundation of their new life. Sometimes love constructed things to endure longer than its own time, she came to understand, and sometimes it reappeared in new guises when you were ready to accept it at last. The storm appeared out of nowhere, sweeping across the prairie like God's own wrath. Sarah was at the window, seeing lightning divide the afternoon sky into jagged sections. The atmosphere was off, too green, too thick, and the wind carried a sound she'd never heard, a low moaning that made the horses stamp restlessly in their stalls. "Mama," Emma raced in from the doorway, her hair blown from the wind. "James is riding in from the Double H. He says there's a twister coming." As if called by her voice, James's horse emerged from behind the sheet of rain, its hooves splattering mud. He urged it hard towards the house, off its back before it even came to a stop, his face set. "Storm cellar now," he called, his voice shouting above the howl of the wind. "Thomas, assist me in getting the horses inside the barn. Emma, take the emergency supplies your mother packed. Sarah, I'm not waiting in the cellar for you and Thomas to be out there." She silenced him, already heading to assist Emma. A flash of lightning showed his face, concern struggling with admiration. "Prickly woman," he grumbled, but there was affection in the words. "Make it fast, but yes." They moved as a unit, no hesitation or uncertainty. The practiced emergency drill of the family, along with James's steady authority, told every second to count as they guided spooked horses into the barn. Sarah caught sight of the lightning-battered beam that would be their crisis point. Thomas did also. "James, look." He indicated the central support where lightning had blackened and fractured the wood. The entire structure creaked ominously in the wind. "Get out now." James shoved them towards the door, but it was too late. With the crack of rifle shots, the beam started to splinter. What followed appeared to happen in slow motion. James pushed Thomas out of harm's way, but the moving beam hit his own shoulder, knocking him to his knees. Sarah cried out his name, struggling against the wind to reach him. "The rope," he panted, indicating the wall. "Sarah, you know what to do." She did know. They'd done emergency repairs. James required they all take up some basic barn engineering. Thomas, Emma, the support poles, just like we practiced. The children moved without hesitation, taking out the reinforcement poles they'd put away for emergencies. Sarah's fingers moved quickly over the rope, setting up the pulley system James had shown her. Together, they worked to shore up the collapsing beam. The family moved like parts of a well-oiled machine. "Never thought," James grunted as he helped position the support despite his injured shoulder. "I'd be so grateful for those practice drills." "Less talking, more bracing," Sarah ordered, but she caught his proud smile through the rain streaming down their faces. The storm raged around them, but inside the barn, 4 people worked in perfect synchronization. Emma, having learned knots from James in their riding instruction, tightened the makeshift braces. Thomas, recalling all that his father had instructed him regarding wood and all that James had contributed regarding engineering, assisted in the calculation of the support angles. As the final brace was tightened, they stood back and panted, observing the strengthened beam resist the wind's attack. The barn groaned and trembled, but it did not give. Into the house quickly, James directed, cradling his injured arm. The twister still coming. They made it to the storm cellar just as the tornado touched down, its roar drowning out all other sounds. In the lamplight below ground, Sarah examined James's shoulder while the children huddled together, listening to the chaos above. "It's not dislocated," she announced with relief, her hands gentle on his skin. "But you'll have some magnificent bruises." "Worth it," he murmured, his good hand covering hers where it lay on his shoulder. "Sarah, watching you all work like that, we learned our lesson well." He looked into her eyes in the dim light. "You've taught us more than how to protect ourselves, James. You've taught us how to defend ourselves." Emma's voice cut from where she sat with Thomas. "We're not scared, Mama. Not as scared as we used to be. James showed us that it's better to be ready than scared, and that family protects each other." Thomas nodded firmly. "That's true." James's breath caught on the boy's words, and Sarah felt his fingers close harder around hers. Beneath them, the storm started to dissipate, its rage spent over the prairie. They remained in the cellar until the all-clear, speaking softly, taking strength from one another's presence. When they came out at last, the barn remained strong, scorched but not broken, like the family that had struggled to preserve it. The beam, which had been struck by lightning, would be a reminder of this evening, of the way crisis had revealed what they were becoming. A family united by more than blood or circumstance, tempered in adversity and made stronger through love. Sarah found James's journal by accident while helping him change his bandages after the storm. It fell from his coat pocket, leather-bound and well-worn, opening to pages filled with neat architectural hand. She tried to look away, but a familiar name caught her eye. Margaret would have loved the Collins children. "It's all right," James said softly, noticing her discovery. "Read it if you'd like. There shouldn't be secrets between us." He hesitated, leaving the prompt word unstated between them. Sarah sat next to him, the journal warm against her palms. His words spoke of a deeper soul than she'd thought, pages stained with pain and hope. He wrote of Margaret's passing, of dark years roaming the double H in solitude, of how a gesture of kindness from a poor widow and her family had stirred something he'd never thought to find again. "I've been writing again since I met your family," he confessed, observing her read. "Margaret always told me I kept my feelings close, that I needed to let them breathe on paper." "She sounds wise," Sarah said softly, flipping the page to see a drawing of Emma riding horseback, Thomas working with his new tools, and herself standing in the doorway of their home. "She would have loved you all." James's voice was heavy with emotion. "Sometimes I think she brought me here. That night I was shot, her way of telling me to stop hiding from life." Sarah closed the journal tenderly. "Describe her to me, the real Margaret, not just the memory." James smiled, leaning back in his chair. "She loved morning glories, hence Emma's saddle design. said they reminded her that beauty opens fresh each day. He smiled quietly. She cooked poorly but would never acknowledge it. Scalded everything but coffee, but she could talk anyone into anything, from ranchers to bank presidents. How did you meet? Denver charity auction. I was there purchasing breeding animals. She was running the auction, attempting to raise funds for an orphanage. His eyes became faraway with recollection. She persuaded me to give 3 times what I'd intended. Said if I could afford to purchase high-bred cattle, I could afford to give to orphans. Sarah smiled, picturing the scenario. She confronted you like someone else I know. His good hand touched hers. Sarah, I've wanted to tell you these past months, seeing you battling for your children, seeing your strength and poise. I never thought I'd feel this way again. James, please let me finish. He tightened his grip on her hand. I am not attempting to take William's place any more than you are taking Margaret's place, but I believe they would both be pleased to see us find one another. Tears stung at Sarah's eyes. The children love you, and I love them like mine. He turned to face her completely. I love their mother too, with a depth that both surprises and humbles me. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. They'd been moving toward this moment for months, but hearing the words spoken aloud made them real, irrevocable. I've been afraid, she admitted. Not of loving you, she said, but of depending on someone again, of risking loss. I know, James's thumb traced circles on her palm. We've both learned the hard way that love means risking pain, but it also means choosing joy, choosing life. He gestured to his journal. I've been writing our story, Sarah. Not just mine, but all of us. How fate or providence brought us together, how your family taught me to live again. Sarah thought of William, of his dream for their children, his hope for their future. She thought of Margaret, who had taught James to open his heart on paper. Their loves hadn't ended with death. They had transformed, becoming the foundation for something new. Read me what you've written, she asked softly. James opened the journal again, finding a recent entry. His voice was soft as he read of Emma's first successful cattle drive, Thomas's increasing dexterity with carpentry, the sound of Sarah's laugh beginning to ring free once more. He wrote of redemption, of second chances, of love that grew not despite past sorrow but because of it, because loss had taught them the value of joy. As his words filled the still room, Sarah saw the last barriers around her heart fall. They were creating something lovely here, not on paper or on the ground, but in the areas between their hearts, in the way their shattered pieces fit to create something whole and new. The snow came early that year, covering the Collins homestead in gleaming white. Sarah stood at her window. Sarah observed James instructing the children in reading weather signs in the morning heavens. Their breath misted the air as he indicated cloud patterns, how to forecast storms based on nature's gentle cues. This winter was different from the previous one, not merely because of their well-equipped barn and solid roof, but because of the coziness in their home amidst the cold without. Evidence of that warmth was scattered all over the house. Handmade Christmas presents lovingly stashed in dresser drawers, clandestine whispers between Emma and Thomas as they made plans to surprise, and the soft satisfaction in James's eyes when he felt no one was observing. The Anderson family lost their cabin in that fire last week, Emma said at dinner, poking stew around on her plate thoughtfully. Mary Anderson indicated their remaining in the church basement through spring. James laid his spoon down, looking at Sarah across the table. They'd already considered bringing in the Andersons, but held off to see what the children had to say. It's terrible cold in that basement, Thomas contributed, and they've got young ones. Sarah smiled with pride at the gentle hearts of her children. Would you two mind sharing your rooms temporarily? The Andersons might like our new addition until they rebuild. We'd need to move the Christmas tree, Emma thought out, but it would be pretty in the front parlor anyway, and I could assist Mr. Anderson in rebuilding. Thomas suggested, James has been instructing me on house frames. James cleared his throat, clearly moved by their immediate acceptance of the idea. That's settled then. I'll ride over tomorrow and make the offer. Later that evening, after the Andersons had been invited and welcomed, Sarah found James in the barn working on something he quickly covered with a cloth. No peeking, he warned with a smile. Christmas secrets. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him work by lamplight. You've got quite a tradition going, you know. The kids are set on it. Their homemade presents have to be just so. Speaking of which, he extracted a small package covered in brown paper. This one won't wait until Christmas. Within was a lovely leather-bound volume containing blank pages, the cover tooled with morning glories like Emma's saddle. I thought, James whispered, you may want to write your own story, the children's as well. Memory is valuable, Sarah. It needs to be kept. Sarah stroked the smooth leather, recalling James's journal and how he'd employed writing as a way of mending. Thank you, she breathed. Their moment was broken by a commotion from the house. the Andersons arriving with their few possessions. Sarah and James rushed to assist, observing as their children greeted the younger Anderson children with spontaneous warmth. That evening, with two households cramped into one, Sarah made the first entry in her new journal. Today we discovered home expands to encompass what love demands. The children surrendered their rooms readily, sensing intuitively what James and Sarah had learned. Blessings multiply when shared. The nights were shorter, but their afternoons were more abundant. James introduced both sets of families to his mother's vintage Christmas carols as they crafted decorations from pine cones and ribbon. The Anderson kids included their own customs: paper snowflakes, Swedish prayers, tales of their grandmother's native country. Emma and Mary Anderson became like sisters, spending afternoons together crafting presents for their families. Thomas adopted young Billy Anderson, instructing him in tools and wood much as James had instructed him. The house filled with the aroma of Christmas baking, Sarah and Mrs. Anderson swapping recipes, blending traditions as smoothly as they blended dough. Even the quiet despondency of Mr. Anderson was beginning to vanish as James engaged him in mapping out the rebuild of their cabin, giving him hope to persevere through the winter. One night, Sarah caught James leaning in the doorway of the full parlor, regarding their extended family with tearful eyes. "Second thoughts about opening your home to them?" she asked gently. He shook his head, remembering Margaret again, but differently now. He faced Sarah, grasping her hand. She always said wealth was for sharing, that a house should be as large as its heart. He smiled. She would have adored this mess. William, too, Sarah agreed. He believed in neighbors helping neighbors. James pulled her closer, both of them watching as Emma taught the youngest Anderson girl to string cranberries. "We're not just honoring their memories anymore, are we?" he said softly. "We're building something new, something that belongs to all of us." Sarah leaned into his strength, feeling the truth of his words. This Christmas, with its lovingly crafted presents and mutual burdens, its mixed traditions and enlarged family, was showing them all what love could construct when allowed to develop. The ominous letter was delivered on a sunlit January morning by a double H ranch hand who'd ridden hard through the snow. Sarah identified Marcus Blackwood's graceful penmanship even before James's eyes clouded at seeing it. "The children?" James asked quietly, scanning the contents. "At school," Sarah replied, moving to read over his shoulder. The words made her blood run cold. "Harrison, your recent domestic arrangements haven't gone unnoticed. Quite touching how you found yourself a ready-made family. Would be a shame if anything happened to them. The double H could have been transferred peacefully. Now, well, even the strongest barn can burn. Consider this a final courtesy." James folded the paper, his knuckles pale. "I should have guessed he wouldn't take it lying down. Blackwood's never been one for gracious defeat." "Tell me," Sarah asked, placing a hand on his arm. "All of it this time." James plopped into a chair, suddenly appearing tired. "Marcus Blackwood and I used to be partners years ago. He financed the Double H's startup when banks wouldn't touch a young rancher's vision. But his dream was not the same as mine." "How so?" "He dreamed of building an empire, push out smaller ranches, dominate the entire range. I dreamed of building something sustainable, something that I wanted to do something that would be sustainable, that would allow the community to expand." Mr. James's jaw clenched. "He didn't take it very well when I bought him out. Began buying up land around the Double H, attempting to choke us off from water rights grazing lands. The night you were shot, his men," James confirmed, "they'd been pressuring other ranchers to sell. I'd gathered evidence and was taking it to the territorial authorities. They tried to stop me." His eyes met Sarah's. "I never meant to bring this danger to your door." Sarah straightened, William's strength flowing through her. "Our door," she corrected firmly. "We face things together now." "No," James began. She interrupted him. "You've restored our future to us. You helped us create something lovely here. We won't let fear take that away from us." A whinny from a horse cut into the silence. They watched Thomas and Emma returning home from school early, flanked by the sheriff through the window. "James Harrison," Sheriff Miller shouted as he rode up. "Heard of suspicious men lurking around the school. Figured to walk your youngsters home." James's expression firmed as he led Emma off her horse. "Did you see any of them?" "No, sir," replied Emma, her voice firm in spite of her evident terror. "But theirs were horses such as those men had last summer when they rode looking for you." Thomas was standing next to James, intuitively adopting his protective stance. "I saw them behind the mercantile too, watching us yesterday when we were shopping with Mama." Sarah shivered, and it wasn't from the winter air. They'd been observed, examined, their daily routines monitored. James must have sensed it too, because he addressed the sheriff with stern resolve. "John, I believe it's time we sat down and talked about Blackwood's activities in detail. I have records you should review, the proof you were carrying that night. The sheriff's hand stayed resting on his gun belt. James nodded. And then some. I've accumulated since Sarah's title deed, threats against other ranchers, information on his coercive methods. He looked at the family. First, though, we need to seal the homestead. The next hours passed in a flurry of activity. James and the sheriff organized armed patrols of trusted men. Sarah and the children brought the horses into the barn, secured windows, and prepared emergency supplies, just as they had before the storm. We've practiced for this too, Emma reminded Thomas as they filled water barrels. Remember what James taught us. Being prepared beats being afraid. Sarah had heard the conversation and felt hot pride swell up in her heart. Her children had come so far, learning not only ranching techniques from James, but bravery and good sense in time of crisis. That night, after the sheriff had taken James's proof and additional patrols were mounted, the family huddled together in the parlor. The Andersons had refused to leave despite the danger, Mr. Anderson asserting categorically that neighbors stand together. James gripped Sarah's hand hard while they made plans for the days ahead. Nobody mentioned fear, but it drifted around the room like wood smoke. They discussed more practical things instead. Rotation of guards, stock checks, warning signals between houses. Whatever comes, James said at last, gazing around at each dear face in turn, we meet it as a family. And in that instant, seeing her children's valiant faces in the glow of the fire, Sarah knew they would win through. Love had created this family. Fear would not destroy it. The raid came 3 nights later at the blackest hour before dawn. Sarah awakened to the scent of smoke and James's commanding voice. They've burned the far pasture. They're attempting to lure us out. The family moved with efficient training. No panic, no wasted movement. Emma and Thomas escorted the Anderson children down into the storm cellar as their parents took their places in the bucket line. James's storm wound had scarcely closed, but he worked ceaselessly, directing men, coordinating their defense. They're coming from the North Ridge, Sheriff Miller's voice carried over the chaos. At least 8 riders. Sarah's heart clenched as she saw James check his gun, his face set in grim lines. Stay with the children, he told her. But she caught his arm. Your wound. I'll be fine. He kissed her quickly, fiercely. Keep them safe. But as he turned to leave, Emma's voice rang out from behind them. Riders riding in from the south as well, across the winter wheat. James whirled, seeing they were being surrounded. Sarah caught a glimpse of the instant his strategic mind switched, mapping out their situation. They drilled for an attack, but not on 2 sides. The barn, he determined. Everyone inside, it's the most secure building we have. They hastened to obey, herding children and adults into the sturdy building. James's work had strengthened it as a fortress, with good lines of sight and defensive positions. While assisting Mrs. Anderson with the youngest children, Sarah overheard James and the sheriff mounting their defense. Thomas, James yelled, did we stash the extra ammunition anywhere? Yes, sir, behind the loose board in the tack room. Good lad. Emma, your mother's rifle. Emma came up with Sarah's Winchester, her young face set. And I recall what you showed me how to load it. Sarah's fear was tinged with pride. Her children were frightened, of course, but they were their father's children, and now James's too. They understood what was required. The first shots were warning shots, ringing off the metal roof of the barn. They are trying to frighten us out, James explained, stationing defenders at key points. Blackwood prefers to avoid outright murder, bad for business. Then what do they want? Mr. Anderson asked, cradling his youngest. A show of force, to prove we're helpless without double H protection. James's voice hardened. But we're not helpless. As if to underscore his point, Emma called out, Mama, they're moving the fire closer to the house. Sarah met James's eyes across the barn. Their home, everything they'd built together, stood vulnerable. But before either of them could say a word, Thomas moved forward. The irrigation system, he stated decisively. The one James built, we can water the north field from here. James's face glowed with intense pride as he spotted the control lever there on the barn wall. Sarah, your boy's a genius. Our boy, she corrected gently, observing Thomas and James manipulate the irrigation controls together. Water started gushing across the north field, forming a wall between. The flames came close to the house, but their triumph did not last long. A bullet shattered the barn door, and night exploded into gunfire. Stay down, James barked, firing back through a defensive port. But when he turned, Sarah saw him stumble, his old injury tearing open under the stress. James, she rushed to him, applying pressure to the expanding bloodstain on his shirt. It's nothing, he tried to assure her, but his face was pale with pain. Papa's hurt, Thomas cried out, forgetting himself in his fear. The word hung in the air for a moment, even amid the chaos. James's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with pain. I'm all right, son, he said hoarsely, We all will be. As if in answer to his words, a new sound cut through the night. Horses coming in a gallop, dozens of them. Sheriff Miller took a risk and looked out the window. "It's the Double H Hands," he yelled. "There are at least 20 of them riding in from the east." The arrival of the ranch hands changed the tide. Surrounded by lawmen and die-hard Double H men, Blackwood's men were quick to flee. As the shooting began to fade away, Sarah stood James up and supported him as they came out of the barn. Their house still remained, courtesy of Thomas's speedy intervention. The blaze was under control, and the ranch hands who had arrived were already putting it out once and for all. But what greeted Sarah most forcefully was the sight inside the barn. Their two families clung together, her kids teaching the younger ones how to be brave, everybody standing by one another during the ordeal. James rested heavily on her shoulder, observing the same scene. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for bringing this threat." "Stop," Sarah turned to him. "You heard Thomas, you're his papa now. Our children chose you, James Harrison. And so did I. Whatever comes, we face it together." Dawn was breaking over the mountains, coloring the snow-covered land with pink and gold hues. Their world had altered in the night, but they had come through stronger. Their relationships tried by fire and terror, and proven indestructible. During the still days after the attack, healing was in a variety of forms. James's bodily injury healed gradually under Sarah's diligent care, but it was the inner healing of the family that was the most profound. The children were the first to bring up the elephant in the room. Emma and Thomas leaned against the doorway of James's recovery room, something behind their backs. "Papa," Emma whispered gently, trying out the word that Thomas had shrieked in terror. "We made you something." James's air caught on the title, his gaze locking with Sarah's where she sat on the side of his bed. She nodded hopefully, her heart full. The children advanced a hand-carved wooden box, the lid adorned with morning glories like those on Emma's saddle. In it lay a ring, a plain gold band that Sarah identified with a jolt. "It belonged to Dad's," Thomas said, his voice low but firm. "We discovered it in Mama's cedar chest. We believed maybe it was time that it had a new function." James leaned forward, feelings evident on his face. "Children, I couldn't. Dad would want you to have it." Emma cut in. "He always told us love was what kept family safe. That's what you did, what you do." Sarah stood up to sit beside James on the bed, grasping his hand. "They're correct," she whispered. "William would be proud of the man who's raised his children, taught them strength and courage and love." James glanced at the ring, then at the faces of his family, for they were his family now, united by choice and love and adversity. "I'd be delighted," he told her gruffly, "but only if your mother will make it legal." He looked over at Sarah, his eyes brimming with meaning. "I should be on bended knee for this, but you're where you need to be." Sarah replied, her voice shaking with unshed tears. "Surrounded by our children in our home, asking a question we've all known the answer to for months." Thomas jumped up and down on his toes. "So you'll marry him, Mama?" "Yes," Sarah laughed, wiping her eyes. "Yes, I'll marry him." Emma carefully placed William's ring in James's palm. As he slipped it onto Sarah's finger, she felt the weight of past and present combining, not replacing old love, but building something new from its foundation. Later that evening, as the children shared the news with the Andersons, who had insisted on staying until James was fully recovered, Sarah found herself alone with her fiancé. "I've been thinking," James spoke, running his voice through a series of thoughtful intros, "about legacies and names." "Oh, the Double H, it was named for Harrison, but perhaps it's time to change that. The Circle C, then, for Collins." Sarah stroked his face softly. "The children wear the Collins name with pride, but perhaps we should have something new, something that encompasses all of us." James took her hand, nipping her palm. "What were you thinking?" "Morning Glory Ranch," she proposed. "For Margaret's flowers, for new beginnings, for beauty unfolding fresh each morning." His eyes misted. "Can rely on you to think of the way to celebrate both our histories while creating our future." He moved gingerly, careful of his healing wound. "I was doing some other things as well, planned to wait." He leaned toward his journal and opened it to a marked page. Within lay adoption documents, all registered, pending only signatures. "If the children wish," he said quietly, "they'll always be Collins by birth, but they could be Harrisons as well. A new beginning for us all." Sarah read through tears as James explained his plan, how the children could choose to keep Collins as a middle name, honoring their father, while adding Harrison to mark their new chapter. How he'd already discussed it with the town lawyer, ensuring everything would be legal and proper. "We'll ask them together," she decided. "When you're stronger." A knock at the door interrupted them, Emma carrying James's evening medicine. Sarah observed as their daughter Fussing attended to him with gentle expertise, fluffing pillows, inspecting his bandage just as she had been instructed. Emma, James said as she was about to leave, "Would you and Thomas come with us for a minute? We want to talk to you about something." Sarah grasped his hand as they spoke with the children about the adoption possibility. The smile on their faces, the wholeness of their acceptance, was all the reply they required. That evening, while writing in her journal, Sarah thought about how love was remaking William's ring, now with fresh vows. Margaret's flowers bloomed in the name of their upcoming ranch, and their children would bear both their past and future in their very names. A family spanning what was and what would be, greater for having been tried by fire. Spring came with a flush of wildflowers and wedding preparations. The morning glories Emma had planted on the porch posts were just starting to come up, holding out promises of summer flowers for their newly christened ranch. The entire community had caught up on the upcoming celebration, viewing it as a... Following the blackness of winter's testing, Sarah came to a halt as Mrs. Peterson made up her wedding dress, her mother's dress nicely modified to suit both her physique and the era. Emma sat and observed the process with sparkling eyes, her own new dress spread out across the bed. "Something borrowed," said Mrs. Peterson, fastening a lacy collar. "This belonged to my grandmother, brought from Boston all the way." "And something blue," Emma contributed, holding out a sapphire brooch. "James had it commissioned to match his eyes," she smiled. "He said to say it's also something new." Sarah stroked the jewel softly. "And something old, that would be me," said a gravelly voice from the doorway. Reverend Matthews, who had wedded Sarah and William all those years before, stood leaning on his cane, although Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that he was not quite what tradition intended. The elderly minister had insisted on conducting the service in spite of his declining health. "Married you to your first love," he'd told Sarah. "Only appropriate I should marry you to your second. The good Lord knows the heart can grow to hold more love." The pre-wedding days changed their homestead. The barn, previously a citadel against risk, was converted into a flower-decked reception hall. The Andersons, now established in their reconstructed cabin, assisted in hanging lanterns from the rafters. Thomas proved himself an expert at directing the decorating crews, his natural talent for organization shining through. James, for his part, seemed to have his own surprises in store. Mysterious packages arrived from Denver, and he spent long hours in private conversation with Emma, who guarded their secrets with diplomatic skill. "You'll see, Mama," was all she would say, her eyes twinkling with shared conspiracy. The wedding morning broke sunny and warm. Sarah awoke to the presence on her pillow of a gift, a framed picture of the family, the first one they'd ever made together. They sat in the middle, the kids standing behind them, all four smiling faces radiating joy. The frame was ornamented with morning glories and wheat stalks, bridging both their histories into their new life together. A note in James's hand said, "Our first official family picture, though you've been in my heart for a whole lot longer. Today, we make it official, my love." The wedding ceremony itself was all Sarah had never known she needed, plain but deep, intimate but shared with their entire community. Emma and Thomas rose up with them, not only as children but as essential members of the family being united. When the time arrived for the vows, James surprised everyone by looking first to the children. "Before I make vows to your mother," he stated, his voice audible across the assembled group, "I have vows for you." He pulled out two small boxes. "These are pocket watches, such as the one that led me to your door on that stormy night. They're inscribed with your new names, the ones you decided on, in honor of both your fathers." Emma opened hers with shaking fingers, reading out, "Emma Collins Harrison, dear daughter." Thomas's voice came in hers. "Thomas Collins Harrison, dear son." James went on, his eyes shining. "I vow to hold you in my heart as my own, to cherish the memory of the good man who blessed you with life, and to do my best each day to live up to the title you've bestowed upon me, Papa." Not a single eye remained dry in the audience. James then addressed Sarah, holding her hands. "And to you, my love, I vow partnership in everything, to create our morning glory ranch together, to bring up our children in love and in wisdom, to weather whatever storms lie ahead with the same bravery you had on that first evening when you took in a hurt stranger and altered all our lives forever." Sarah's reply was from the heart, unpracticed but sincere. "I promise to continue building this beautiful life with you, to blend our family's legacies into something new and wonderful, and to face each dawn grateful for the love that brought us together." Reverend Matthews beamed as he pronounced them husband and wife. As James kissed her, Sarah heard Emma whisper to Thomas, "Now we're officially Harrisons too." The celebration that followed was a true community affair. Tables groaned with potluck dishes, kids played among the lantern-lit trees, and even the most proper women found themselves participating when the dancing began. Glancing around at their changed barn, at their children dancing with the Anderson children, at James's beaming face as he took it all in, Sarah felt the goodness of their path. They had constructed this joy together, brick by brick, decision by decision, love by love. The morning glories were not in bloom yet, but the promise was there in each green shoot stretching toward the sun. New beginnings, new life, new beauty unfolding anew each morning. A year passed, and Sarah sat in the parlor of Morning Glory Ranch, writing the events of the day in the leather-bound journal given to her by James. Across the window, morning glories were blooming in bold purple and blue, their vines sturdy and rooted now, just as had the family they symbolized. The new family Bible opened to the side of her, its pages chronicling their shared lives, the children's adoption, the wedding, and now her hand rested on her burgeoning belly, the newest Harrison who would come with the spring. Emma's voice wafted in from the outside, firm and clear, as she instructed the ranch hands driving cattle up to the north pasture. At 15, she'd settled into her position as James's apprentice, demonstrating a keen aptitude for managing the ranch that caused her father to swell with pride. "She's got both our heads for business," James had remarked recently, observing Emma tabulating breeding records, "and both our hearts for the land." Thomas, at 12 now, had discovered his own niche, marrying William's woodworking aptitude with James's analytical mind. The beautiful cradle he was working on in his workshop demonstrated how harmoniously those inherited skills mixed. Sarah smiled, recalling the morning Thomas had come to show her his design plans, telling her how he'd drawn from both families, morning glories along the rails carved out, wheat stalks in the headboard, all underpinned by the strong work William had taught him to appreciate. "The baby needs to know where they come from," he'd said gravely, "all the pieces that made us what we are." A disturbance in the yard caused Sarah to go to the window. James was coming back from the Double H headquarters, where Blackwood's trial had finally ended. The kids ran to greet him, and Sarah could even from far away read the good news in his demeanor. "Guilty on all counts," he declared as she caught up with them. "The evidence was too great to deny. Blackwood's kingdom is over." Emma clung to him tightly. "Does this mean the Morning Glory Ranch is safe?" "Growing and safe," James affirmed, embracing Sarah as well. "The water rights that Blackwood attempted to steal were awarded to us by the territory judge. We can develop the breeding program as we envisioned." Thomas glanced up from the group of family members. "Then we will be able to help more families like the Andersons." "That's correct, son," James tousled his hair. "The Morning Glory Ranch will be more than just cattle growing. It'll grow hope." Later that night, once the children were in bed, Sarah and James sat on the porch swing, watching the stars come out. The evening wind bore the sweet aroma of the flowers that now held a special meaning. "I discovered something today," James announced, drawing out a creased envelope from his vest. While going through the last of the trial documents, it was the threatening letter Blackwood had sent a year ago, its words now powerless to inspire fear. Sarah read it again, remembering the terror of that time, the way it had forged them into something stronger. "We've come so far," she murmured, leaning into her husband's strength. "We have." James's hand covered hers where it rested on her growing belly. "Sometimes I think of that night, bleeding in your wheat field, how close I came to never knowing this happiness." "God had other plans," Sarah whispered, "for all of us." They sat in silence, listening to the sounds of night on their ranch, a cow moaning in the distance, horses shifting in the barn, and somewhere, an owl singing to her mate. All the everyday, sweet sounds of a life built on love. "I added something to the Bible today," James said finally. "Been wanting to for a while." Sarah trailed inside with him, where he flung open the family Bible to a fresh page. There in his tidy script he'd written, "Let it be known that love bridges across loss, that family is created by choice as much as by blood, and that hope, like morning glories, grows afresh every day. The Harrison family, born of the Collins and Harrison lines, is a testament to God's mercy in providing second chances and new beginnings. Completed today as thanks for the evening when a poor widow and her children saved a dying cowboy, without knowing he was going to be God's response to their needs, just as they were his response to theirs." Sarah's eyes welled up with tears as she read. "It's perfect," she breathed. "Preserve our story," James urged, holding her tight. "So our children and their children's children will know that love can cure any hurt, construct any bridge, change any life. They should know they are from people who believed in love and not fear, hope and not despair, and found their fairy tale by believing in second chances." Sarah traced the words on the page, then upward to brush her husband's cheek. Outside, the night stars twinkled bright above the Morning Glory Ranch, blessing the family and home that had been born out of one act of kindness on a stormy evening in Montana.